The conflict began with the soft, persistent rain of a cool autumn morning, a sound in stark contrast to the rising tension at the Royal Grand Hotel's front desk. Mrs. Ishikawa, a woman of profound composure in her elegant blue coat, stood as an island of tranquility amidst a sea of confusion. The receptionist, his professional calm long since evaporated, wrung his hands, his anxious gaze darting between Mrs. Ishikawa and the growing, curious crowd. "Ma'am," he repeated, his voice strained, "we genuinely don't understand what you're saying." Behind Mrs. Ishikawa, her assistant was a flurry of motion, frantically trying to translate with an app on his phone, his face a mask of frustration and apology. The problem was simple yet insurmountable. A five-star hotel built on global accessibility was failing its most basic task. "She booked the presidential suite," a staff member whispered from behind the counter, "but she won't respond to anything in English, French, or even Mandarin." The air, once scented with coffee and polished wood, now felt thick with an unspoken prejudice. The clicking of high heels announced the arrival of Ms. Hayes, the hotel's famously sharp-witted manager, a woman who saw efficiency as the highest virtue and this incident as a personal affront. She approached with a practiced, icy calm, her hands resting on the counter like a judge's gavel. "I am the general manager," she announced, her voice a perfect tone of authority. "How can we assist you, ma'am?" Mrs. Ichikawa's reply was a soft, clear stream of Japanese, accompanied by a slight, respectful bow. Ms. Hayes leaned in, a condescending smirk playing on her lips, and spoke slowly, enunciating each word with biting clarity. "This is America, ma'am. If you want to be served here, you need to speak English." A heavy silence fell, broken only by the muttering of the crowd. Ms. Hayes's mask of politeness dissolved into open irritation as she turned to her staff. "She is deliberately causing a scene," she hissed. "This is unacceptable." The unspoken tension soured into open contempt as she waved over a security guard, demanding a formal report. Mrs. Ishikawa's assistant, desperate, stepped forward. "Please, she is one of the most respected executives in Japan," he pleaded. Ms. Hayes was unmoved. "She's holding up service in a five-star hotel. We don't have time for guessing dames." Just then, a flicker of movement caught the corner of her eye. From across the lobby, where he had been quietly tending to a potted palm, a man in a simple gardener's uniform named Leo Barnes stepped forward. His presence was unassuming, a stark contrast to Ms. Hayes's commanding aura. He placed his tools back on his cart, his hands moving with the deliberate calm of a man comfortable with the quiet rhythm of growth and nature. He approached the tense scene, and in a moment that froze the entire lobby, he performed a deep, reverent bow, one of such perfect grace and respect that it spoke a language far beyond words. He then met Mrs. Ishikawa's gaze, his own eyes warm with empathy, and spoke in impeccable fluent Japanese. "My deepest apologies for the inconvenience, madam. How may I be of assistance?" For a fleeting moment, Mrs. Ishikawa's serene mask wavered, a flicker of surprise and gratitude illuminating her eyes. Her reply was a soft, melodious sentence, and Leo simply nodded, his understanding evident in every gesture. He turned to the stunned receptionist and, with a voice clear and devoid of ego, relayed Mrs. Ishikawa's request. Mrs. Ishikawa would like to check in for the presidential suite. Here is her passport. As a key was issued, the tension evaporated, replaced by a quiet awe. The problem was solved, not by an expensive manager, but by a humble gardener whose kindness had transcended a language barrier and, in a single moment, restored the hotel's missing humanity. Ms. Hayes's face, however, was a study in cold fury, a silent storm brewing behind a brittle facade. Her humiliation was complete. The problem was solved, but the warmth of the lobby did not reach the manager's office that evening. The air inside was glacial, punctuated only by the rhythmic tap of Ms. Hayes's fountain pen on her dark mahogany desk. She did not look at Leo, who stood before her in his now unfamiliar uniform, a posture of calm endurance. She stared into the middle distance, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Mr. Barnes," she began, her voice sickeningly sweet, "that little performance of yours this afternoon, quite unforgettable." She stood up, her voice now laced with contempt. "But there's a problem. You overstepped. Let me remind you of your position here." She slid a sheet of paper across the desk. "Starting tomorrow, you'll be on basement and storage duty, and you will scrub the filthy grease traps in the kitchen." Leo's jaw clenched. A surge of indignation rose in him, but he suppressed it, a silent mantra running through his mind, for Lily, his little girl. He lifted his head, met Miss Hayes's gaze directly, and replied with a steady voice that carried the weight of a sacrifice. "Understood, ma'am." Leo turned, ready to leave the hellish office. Just as his hand touched the doorknob, the heavy wooden door swung open without a knock. Mrs. Ishikawa stood there, as still as a statue. Her assistant hovered just behind her, a look of bewilderment on his face. She had come to find and personally thank the kind staff member, but the heated exchange from within had stopped her at the door. She had heard everything. Ms. Hayes's expression faltered, but she quickly tried to regain her composure. "Mrs. Ishikawa, can I help you with something?" Mrs. Ishikawa did not answer her. Her gaze swept past Ms. Hayes's now vanished arrogance before settling on Leo. She inclined her head slightly and posed a question in English, her voice calm, but each word landed like a dagger in the silence. "Ms. Hayes, I happen to overhear. Is it the policy of the Royal Grand Hotel to punish an employee for demonstrating kindness and professionalism toward a guest?" A few staff members passing in the hallway had stopped, peering in with curiosity. The air grew thick with tension. "That's not it at all, ma'am," Ms. Hayes stammered, forcing a brittle smile. "This is simply an internal disciplinary matter." "Internal discipline?" Mrs. Ishikawa raised a single elegant eyebrow. "You consider cultural empathy overstepping? You consider assisting a guest an offense worthy of punishment?" Each question was a direct hit, leaving Ms. Hayes with no room to escape. The manager now looked small and pathetic before the very woman she had scorned. Completely ignoring the frozen manager, Mrs. Ishikawa turned to Leo. The ice in her eyes melted, replaced by genuine respect. "Mr. Barnes, is it not?" Leo, still stunned, could only manage a nod. Mrs. Ishikawa offered a small smile. "I would like to hear your story, if you would be so kind as to spare me a moment. Shall we speak in the tea lounge?" "I would be honored, ma'am," Leo said softly. And just like that, the most powerful woman in the room turned away from the marble desk and walked side by side with the custodian toward the quiet lounge. Leo sat up straight, his hands on his thighs, feeling distinctly out of place amid the opulence. He was still wearing his gray gardener's uniform. Opposite him, Mrs. Ishikawa, with an effortless grace, was preparing the tea herself. She did not allow the server to do it. She lifted the teapot with both hands, a gesture of profound respect, and poured a golden stream into the porcelain cup before Leo. "Please," she said in Japanese, sliding the cup toward him. "Thank you," Leo replied, also in Japanese, by sheer reflex. Mrs. Ishikawa paused for a moment, a knowing smile gracing her lips. "Your Japanese is impeccable," she remarked, her voice filled with admiration. "It has the soul of Kyoto in it. The honorifics, the intonation, the unexpected words," left Leo stunned. The past he had tried so desperately to bury had just been summoned. He gave a slight nod. "Yes, ma'am. I used to be a lecturer in cultural linguistics at Kyoto University. That was many years ago." "I thought as much." Mrs. Ishikawa nodded as if confirming something she had already sensed. "That makes me wonder all the more. Why would someone like you ... She let the sentence trail off, her gaze full of meaning. Leo simply remained silent, unsure how to respond. Mrs. Ishikawa recognized the shift in him. She did not push but waited, with quiet patience. "So," she asked gently, "what is your story, Mr. Barnes? Why would a former lecturer from Kyoto University take a job like this and endure such treatment?" Leo took a deep breath, the bitter taste of injustice he had swallowed still lingering. He decided to share his story, not to complain, but because he sensed the woman across from him would truly listen. "I wasn't always a gardener," he began, his voice low. "When I first came here, I worked in guest relations. With my experience and language skills, I did well, maybe a little too well." He looked up, a sad smile flickering across his face. Manager Hayes didn't like that. She didn't like how the guests, especially the Japanese guests, often sought me out for help instead of her. She saw it as a challenge to her authority. Then one day, she found a minor discrepancy in my records and used it as a pretext to demote me. She said I was either custodial work or I was out. With a young daughter to care for, I didn't have much of a choice. Mrs. Ishikawa nodded silently, empathy clear in her eyes. She knew Ms. Hayes's type. "But that's just the end of the story," Leo continued, his voice growing more distant, as if drifting to another memory. "The reason I'm here, the reason I'm no longer in Kyoto, is because of my wife." He paused as if saying her name aloud was painful. "Her name was Yumi. We met in Kyoto. I was a passionate young lecturer, and she, to me, was the soul of that city. Yumi taught me that Japanese wasn't just words. It was the depth of a bow, the silence between sentences, the ability to feel what's left unsaid. We had a beautiful life and a beautiful little girl, Lily." He smiled, a genuine one this time, at the mention of his daughter. "But then Yumi got sick so fast. Everything fell apart. After she passed." Leo's voice broke. Kyoto wasn't my home anymore. Every street corner, every temple, every cherry blossom season. It was all torture. The academic world I once loved felt hollow and meaningless. I'd stand at the lectern, but my spirit had died with her. He looked down at his callous hands, the hands of a gardener. I looked at my daughter Lily, and I saw Yumi in her. I knew I couldn't be the father she needed if I was drowning in that grief. So I gave it all up. I left my professorship, left Kyoto, and came back here with only one goal: to devote all my time and energy to raising my daughter. This gardening job, he concluded, his voice steady again, as humbling as it is, gives me something my professorship couldn't: a stable schedule. I can take my daughter to school every morning and pick her up every afternoon. I can be home when she's sick. I traded my career for time with my daughter, and that's a choice I've never regretted." The tea lounge fell completely silent. Leo's story, one of love, loss, and profound sacrifice, hung in the air between them. Mrs. Ishikawa sat the teapot down and looked directly at him. She let out a soft sigh, then a surprising, almost mischievous smile touched her lips. Mrs. Ishikawa suddenly switched to English, her voice hesitant and imperfect, a stark contrast to her native fluency. "Actually, my English is not very good." Leo's head snapped up, astonishment plain on his face. She smiled at his expression before switching back to her fluid Japanese, as if a weight had been lifted. "The truth is, I do want to speak English," she said, her tone warmer now, "but my proficiency is only at a basic level. Genuine communication is difficult and exhausting for me." It was precisely because of that limitation, she continued, her gaze deepening, the playful spark replaced by the sharp insight of a leader, that she had turned it into a test. Leo froze. The entire scene at the front desk suddenly clicked into place, viewed through a completely different lens. "That's right," Mrs. Ishikawa affirmed, as if reading his thoughts. "Speaking only Japanese isn't just my way of honoring my own culture. It's more than that. In a world where English is seen as the language of power, where everyone expects others to adapt to them, I want to find the opposite. She leaned forward, her voice compelling. I want to find the people with enough empathy, patience, and kindness to take a step toward me, instead of just standing still and demanding that I walk toward them. I want to find those who see a person in distress, not an inconvenient troublemaker. And today, Mr. Barnes, you were the only one who passed that test. Now Mrs. Ishikawa's smile was not just one of gratitude, but one of kinship, of finding a rare gem in the most unexpected of places. The conversation in the tea lounge concluded, but Mrs. Ishikawa's actions had only just begun. She left the hotel as quietly as she had arrived. Ms. Hayes breathed a sigh of relief, assuming she had dodged a bullet. A simple complaint in the file, at worst, she thought. She had fatally underestimated the woman she had scorned. 2 weeks later, news that sent shockwaves through the hospitality industry broke. The Royal Grand Hotel Group announced a major new investor. A significant block of shares had been acquired by Ishikawa Tech, the Japanese technology giant, and its CEO, Mrs. Ishikawa, would be formally joining the board of directors. The news hit Ms. Hayes like a thunderbolt. She stood frozen in her office, the financial newspaper trembling in her hands. The woman she had all but dismissed from her lobby like a beggar was now one of the most powerful figures in the corporation, one of the people who held her career in their hands. The first board meeting Mrs. Ishikawa attended was held in the Shield, most luxurious conference room of the Royal Grand Hotel itself. Ms. Hayes, as the branch manager, was required to be present to report on operations. She walked into the boardroom, her heart pounding against her ribs. She tried to avoid the gaze of Mrs. Ishikawa, who sat in a place of honor next to the chairman, composed and formidable. After the dry financial reports, the chairman turned to Mrs. Ishikawa. Mrs. Ikewa, as our newest member and an expert in customer experience, do you have any observations on our current operations? This was the moment Ms. Hayes had been dreading. Mrs. Ishikawa smiled politely, but her eyes were razor-sharp as they locked onto Ms. Hayes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do, in fact, have a few observations based on a recent personal experience. Right here at this very hotel. She began to recount her story from the lobby 2 weeks prior. She didn't name anyone, merely describing the events objectively. A guest unable to speak English, an impatient and scornful manager, and a gardener who resolved the issue with kindness and empathy. The issue here wasn't a language barrier, Mrs. Ishikawa said, her voice resonating through the room. The issue was a service culture barrier. We are running an international hotel chain, yet we punish employees who possess cross-cultural skills. We are promoting managers who wield authority instead of empathy. Ms. Hayes, she said, addressing the manager directly, making her jump. Do you believe that banishing a talented employee to clean grease traps simply because he outperformed you is an effective management strategy? The room fell deathly silent. All eyes turned to Ms. Hayes, who was ashen-faced and speechless. This incident reveals a critical flaw in our system, Mrs. Ishikawa continued, turning back to the board. We need a fundamental change. We don't just need managers who are good with numbers. We need leaders who are good with people. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Therefore, I propose the creation of a new position, Vice President of Service Quality and Guest Culture. This role will be responsible for retraining our entire staff, establishing new standards for cross-cultural communication, and ensuring that every single guest is treated with the utmost respect, regardless of where they come from or what language they speak. The chairman nodded enthusiastically, completely won over. A brilliant idea. And do you already have a candidate in mind for this crucial position, Mrs. Ishikawa? Mrs. Ishikawa smiled, a smile of absolute victory. I do. That person is Mr. Leo Barnes. He not only possesses an outstanding academic background in cultural linguistics from a prestigious university, but more importantly, he has demonstrated integrity, kindness, and crisis management skills even from the lowest position. He is the one who understands best what needs to change. The decision was passed swiftly. Leo's appointment was effective immediately. He was not just restored to his rightful place. He was given the power to reshape the entire culture of the hotel. When the meeting ended and the other members had left, only the chairman, Mrs. Ishikawa, and a catatonic Ms. Hayes remained. The chairman turned to Mrs. Ishikawa, a look of profound admiration on his face. "That was a masterstroke, Mrs. Ishikawa," he said. Mrs. Ishikawa simply gave a slight nod, her eyes never leaving Ms. Hayes. "I didn't want to fire her," she said. "That would have been too easy a punishment." Mrs. Ishikawa rose and walked toward the frozen manager. "Ms. Hayes," she began, her voice cold and measured, "you are not being terminated." A flicker of hope, desperate and pathetic, appeared in Ms. Hayes's eyes. "Instead," Mrs. Ishikawa continued, the words landing like small, heavy stones, "you will remain here and report directly to the new vice president, Mr. Leo Barnes." She paused, letting the full weight of the words sink in. "Every day you will learn from him how to treat a guest. You will adhere to the policies that he himself sets. You will have to watch the man you once scorned succeed and earn the respect of everyone around him." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a near inaudible whisper. "That, Ms. Hayes, is the real punishment, but also an opportunity. Now get to work under your new boss." With that, Mrs. Ishikawa turned and walked away decisively, leaving Ms. Hayes alone in the cold boardroom to face the new reality of her career. 6 months later, the lobby of the Royal Grand Hotel was completely transformed. It wasn't in its decor, but in its atmosphere. The underlying tension was gone, replaced by a professional yet profoundly warm energy. At the front desk, the staff now wore small, elegant name tags. Next to their names were the flags of the countries whose languages they spoke fluently, one of Leo's first initiatives. Leo Barnes, now in a perfectly tailored suit instead of a gray uniform, was making his rounds in the main lobby. He didn't walk like a supervisor, but like a host, welcoming guests into his home. He paused to exchange a few words in French with an elderly couple, then turned to help a bellhop rearrange luggage more efficiently. Everyone greeted him with respect, not fear. "Good morning, Mr. Vice President," a young receptionist said. Leo smiled back. "Please just call me Leo." His life had changed in every way that mattered. He had moved into a more spacious apartment, one with enough light for Lily's piano practice. His schedule, though busy, was more flexible than ever, allowing him to never miss one of his daughter's school performances. He could breathe, truly breathe, for the first time in years. The grand glass doors of the hotel slid open, and Mrs. Ishikawa walked in. She wasn't with her assistant, nor was she wearing the power suit from the boardroom. Today she wore a silk dress the color of wisteria, carrying a small gift box wrapped in traditional washi paper. "Leo-san," she called, a warm smile on her face. "Ishikawa-san," Leo replied, walking over to greet her. "You're earlier than I expected." "I couldn't wait to try that new lotus tea you mentioned," she answered, then offered him the gift box. "A little something for Lily-chan. It's a keishi doll. I hope she'll like it." "She will absolutely cherish it. Thank you." They were no longer just boss and employee or investor and manager. They were friends, bound by a mutual respect that had blossomed from a moment of crisis. Mrs. Ishikawa visited the hotel often, not to inspect, but simply to chat and have tea with Leo. Listening to his stories about the positive changes at the hotel and the adorable anecdotes about Lily, as they were about to head toward the tea lounge, a German family approached the check-in counter. They looked exhausted from their long flight and were trying to explain something with their limited English. The receptionist, instead of panicking, calmly signaled for them to wait a moment. Out of habit, Leo started to step forward. But before he could, something unexpected happened. Ms. Hayes, who was supervising the lobby, had already assessed the situation. Without a trace of her former irritation or annoyance, she walked over decisively. She didn't speak to the German family, but instead turned to another staff member nearby, one wearing a name tag with a German flag. Her voice was clear and professional. "Mark, could you please assist these guests?" The young man named Mark immediately stepped forward, bowed, and began speaking to the family in fluent German. The exhaustion on their faces instantly melted into relief and gratitude. Ms. Hayes observed until she was certain everything was in hand, before quietly stepping back to resume her duties. Mrs. Ishikawa watched the entire scene from a distance. She wasn't just looking at Leo, she was seeing a system working in perfect harmony. She saw Ms. Hayes, though still unsmiling, acting with precision and professionalism, utilizing the resources Leo had put in place. She saw an employee confidently solving a problem. And she saw Leo, no longer just a bridge, but the architect, who had built all the other bridges. The family's relief, Ms. Hayes' professionalism, and Leo's quiet look of satisfaction. It was all the fruit of the seed she had planted. She smiled. She had been right all along. The most important language, in the end, is always spoken from the heart.